Picture this. January 20th, 1945. Major General Curtis LeMay stands on the tarmac at North Field, Guam, watching another formation of B-29 superfortresses vanish into clouds at 30,000 feet. In his hand are the latest reconnaissance photos from yesterday's raid on Tokyo, images that tell a painfully familiar story. Hundreds of bomb craters mark fields and residential blocks. The Nakajima aircraft engine plant, the actual target, sits essentially untouched in the center of the frame, smoke damage at best. 274 bombers were dispatched. Weather and mechanical trouble cut that to 196 that actually reached Tokyo. They dropped 1,412 tons of high explosives from 6 miles up. LeMay's after-action reports show about 9% of those bombs landed anywhere near their intended targets. 9%. That's not bombing. That's expensive confetti with explosives attached. He crumples the photo in his fist, jaw tight with frustration. At 38, he's already earned a reputation as one of the most effective bomber commanders in Europe, where he pioneered tight formations and new tactics. Right now, though, he's watching the most costly weapons program in American history stumble. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress cost $3 billion to develop and build, more than the Manhattan Project, and more than any other aircraft program combined. After 6 months of sustained operations from bases in China and the Marianas, the strategic bombing campaign has produced almost nothing measurable that justifies those billions. The numbers are brutal. Since June 1944, B-29 formations have flown hundreds of sorties against Japanese industry, dumping thousands of tons of explosives. They've lost dozens of aircraft, their wreckage scattered across the Pacific. Hundreds of men are dead, missing, or prisoners, and Japanese war production has barely slowed. In some cases, factory output has actually risen despite the bombing. Intelligence reports show workers clearing rubble and resuming production within days. It's as if the bombers are irritating Japan, not crippling it. LeMay knows the crews aren't the problem. Many flew with him in Europe. They're skilled, disciplined, and brave. The kind of men who fly 1,000-mile missions over open ocean, fully aware that engine trouble means death by drowning. They meet Japanese fighters and flak with the steadiness crews showed over Germany. It's not courage or competence. It's not even the airplane. The B-29 is a genuine technological marvel, a pressurized cabin that keeps crew survivable at 60 degrees. 4 massive 18-cylinder engines producing 2,200 horsepower each. The ability to carry 5 tons of bombs over 1,500 miles. Remote-controlled gun turrets guided by a sophisticated fire control computer. And a service ceiling above 30,000 feet where Japanese fighters struggle to reach and most flak burst harmlessly below. On paper, it's perfect. In practice, it's failing. The culprit is physics, raw, indifferent physics. At 30,000 feet over Japan, American crews face atmospheric conditions European operations never saw. The jet stream, a meteorological force not fully understood in 1945, screams over the home islands at speeds that seem impossible. High-altitude winds regularly top 200 mph. When a B-29 punches into that wall of wind, its ground speed can fall to 70 or 80 mph. The aircraft crawls over the target, giving Japanese gunners plenty of time to aim. Bombardiers peering through Norden bomb sights watch helplessly as their calculations break down. The Norden was designed to compensate for wind, but not for winds moving at highway speeds. When the jet stream pushes from behind, things go the other way. Ground speed can leap to 350 mph speed or more. The bomber flashes over the target so fast bombardiers can't track it properly. The Norden, impressive as it is, has mechanical limits. It can't handle extreme rapid changes in velocity. Bombs are released too early or too late and missed by hundreds of yards. Altitude makes everything worse. From 6 miles up, a 500-pound bomb takes roughly a minute to fall. That's 60 seconds during which the bomb travels through multiple atmospheric layers, each with different wind speeds and directions. The bombardier measures wind at bombing altitude and feeds it into the Norden's mechanical computer, but those readings are practically worthless. The wind at 30,000 feet bears little resemblance to conditions at 20,000, 15,000, or 10,000 feet. The bomb tumbles through shifting winds, slowed and pushed as air density increases. By impact, it can land anywhere inside a circle roughly 2,000 feet across. That's not precision. That's random destruction with a loose sense of direction. For Japanese industry, this is a godsend. Their war production isn't concentrated in giant factory complexes like those in the Ruhr or around Hamburg. Japan used a dispersed model. An engine might need precision parts from 30 different suppliers, many operating out of workshops that look like ordinary homes, with machine shops on the ground floor and families above. Electronics were assembled in converted rice warehouses. The whole supply chain was woven into neighborhoods invisible from high altitude. Hitting those targets requires actual precision, bombs landing within 100 feet of a specific workshop. From 6 miles up with 1945 technology, that's basically impossible. The bombers can flatten city blocks with enough ordnance, but wiping out random blocks doesn't destroy the tiny shop that keeps the line running. It just kills civilians and leaves production intact. Lieutenant General Henry Happ. Arnold knows it's impossible, and the knowledge is eating him alive. He's the commanding general of the United States Army Air Forces, a man who spent 2 decades arguing that strategic bombing could win wars without massive ground invasions. He fought bureaucratic battles with Army generals who wanted air power under ground forces. He risked his career defending the idea of an independent air force. Since the war began, he's had 4 heart attacks, each one triggered by stress over bomber operations and strategy. The B-29 was supposed to vindicate everything Arnold believed. Instead, it's proving his critics right. In early January 1945, Arnold sends LeMay a carefully worded message through official channels. Diplomatic on paper, lethal in meaning. Fix the bombing campaign in the next 60 days or you'll be relieved. Your predecessor, Brigadier General Haywood Hansell, one of the architects of American strategic bombing doctrine, was fired 3 weeks ago because the campaign wasn't producing results. You have 60 days to show measurable improvement. After that, planning for Operation Downfall and the invasion of Japan will intensify. Current estimates project 500,000 American casualties, maybe more. LeMay reads between the lines and sees what Arnold can't say out loud. If strategic bombing can't force Japan to surrender, millions of American soldiers will be sent to storm defended beaches in an invasion that would dwarf D-Day. Every Japanese city could become another Iwo Jima or Okinawa, battles where defenders fought to the death. Civilians are being trained to resist with bamboo spears and satchel charges. Intelligence estimates place 2 million troops on homeland defense and thousands of kamikaze aircraft in reserve. Those casualty projections aren't hyperbole. They're realistic assessments of what happens when you invade a nation willing to die fighting. If the B-29 campaign fails, the Air Force's central claim, that air power can replace costly ground warfare, will die on the beach with those troops. Arnold built his career on that argument. If it collapses, his legacy becomes a warning about visionaries who promised more than they could deliver. So LeMay does something that sounds insane to bomber theorists across the Air Force. He decides to throw away altitude. The foundation of American strategic bombing rests on one sacred principle: high altitude equals protection. At 30,000 feet, you're above most anti-aircraft guns. Japanese fighters struggle to climb that high without burning themselves out, and crews can survive long enough to fly many missions. That theory justified spending $3 billion on the B-29. But LeMay has been scrutinizing intelligence and data obsessively, and the reports tell a different story. Japanese air defenses in 1945 aren't what they were in 1942 or 1943. Months of American fighter sweeps, carrier raids, and shortages have gutted Japan's experienced pilots. New pilots often have as little as 100 hours of flight time before combat. Fuel shortages ground much of the remaining fighter force. The famed Zero fighters are being saved for kamikaze strikes rather than general air defense. The fighter threat is diminished. More importantly, Japan's heavy flak defenses are optimized for high-altitude attacks. Their big guns, the 88mm and 120mm pieces around cities and industry, their fire control systems, searchlights and rangefinders were set up to engage targets at 20,000 feet and above. Intelligence analysts studying captured plans believe Japan has minimal low-altitude anti-aircraft capability around many cities because their doctrine assumed American attacks would come from high altitude. What if we don't give them what they expect? What if we come in low below their prepared systems where their defenses are effectively useless? The idea isn't merely theoretical to LeMay. It becomes a tactical imperative. Low altitude has been used in the Pacific since 1942. Skip bombing against ships at wavetop height, low-level strikes on airfields and supply points, and RAF low-altitude night raids over Germany at terrible cost. But nobody has tried sustained low-altitude attacks with B-29s on major Japanese industrial cities. The B-29 was designed to operate high, pressurized cabins, turbo-supercharged engines, structures built for the stratosphere. Using them low seems to contradict everything the airplane was built for. LeMay spends 2 weeks running calculations and studying weather patterns. Strip away doctrine and the physics are straightforward. Lower altitude means far less time for bombs to drift. From 7,000 feet, a bomb falls in roughly 22 seconds versus about 60 seconds from 30,000 feet. Less fall time means wind has less opportunity to push the bomb sideways. Temperature and pressure variations between release and impact are smaller, so the bomb's path is more predictable. Accuracy should improve by at least 4 or 5 times under similar conditions, maybe more if weather cooperates. But flying at 7,000 feet also means entering the engagement range of every Japanese gun and defense. Air is denser, so airspeeds are different. You're visible to radar and fighter bases over a much wider radius. Low-level attacks increase exposure to light and heavy flak, anti-aircraft batteries, and any fighters that can still get aloft. It's riskier for crews, plain and simple. It means potentially catastrophic losses. LeMay's staff officers, seasoned men who had flown combat themselves, tell him bluntly it could be suicide. Operations warns losses might hit 70%. This isn't pessimism. It's what veterans expect when slow, large bombers fly into airspace where every gun can reach them. 70% losses would mean roughly 200 aircraft destroyed and some 2,000 men killed, wounded, or captured in a single night, the equivalent of losing all of Bomber Command on the worst nights over Germany. Intelligence hedges its bets. The data on Japanese low-altitude defenses is incomplete. Confidence is moderate, not high. They believe Japan lacks extensive low-level flak in many cities. But belief isn't certainty. The first raid could run into a wall of defensive fire no one has foreseen. Logistics officers put it bluntly. If losses approach the predictions, the entire Mariana's B-29 force could be wiped out in 3 or 4 missions. There aren't spare aircraft sitting in reserve, nor pools of trained crews to replace losses. If this fails, the strategic bombing campaign is finished. Every conventional calculation, every experienced advisor, every common-sense argument says this plan is catastrophic. And still LeMay signs the order. On March 8th, he briefs wing commanders and senior officers on Operation Meetinghouse, the first large-scale low-altitude incendiary attack on Tokyo. The briefing room falls completely silent as he lays out the mission. Bombers will attack singly rather than in formation. That removes the mutual defensive fire tight formations provide, but also removes the visibility that big formations create. Attack altitude will be between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, low enough that the jet stream is irrelevant and bombardiers can see targets clearly. To maximize bomb load, all defensive armament except tailguns will be removed. Gunners go back to Guam. Their weight is replaced with incendiary bombs. Each B-29 carries 7 tons of ordnance, more than double a normal combat load. The weapons are M69 incendiary clusters, 6-pound bomblets filled with jellied gasoline, bundled into groups of 38. When the clusters open, the bomblets scatter and ignite on impact, spreading burning gel that reaches temperatures over 2,000 degrees and can't be put out with water. The silence in the room lasts several long seconds. Colonel Thomas Power, commander of the 314th Bombardment Wing on Guam, finally says what everyone is thinking. "General, we could lose half the force on the first mission, maybe more." LeMay removes the ever-present cigar from his mouth, the public image he always carries. And for a moment, his face is unreadable. "We are going to lose this war if we don't start hitting targets that matter," he says. "High-altitude bombing isn't working. You've seen the photos. We're wasting ordnance and getting nothing. This changes now. You have your orders, Colonel." Dismissed. Officers leave without the usual ribbing that combat airmen use to cope with stress. They brief their crews. Reactions range from shock to grim determination to outright terror. Stripping defensive guns off B-29s feels like taking away parachutes. Flying low feels like volunteering for death. But orders are orders, and these men don't question LeMay's tactical choices. On the night of March 9th, 325 B-29 superfortresses lift off from Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. The aircraft are exactly as ordered. No side guns, no top turrets, no ammunition for weapons that aren't mounted. Each bomber carries 7 tons of M69 clusters, enough incendiary power to destroy several city blocks under the right conditions. The planes are so heavily loaded, pilots need every foot of runway. Some barely clear trees at the strip's end. Choosing incendiaries is deliberate and intelligence-driven. Japanese cities aren't built like European ones. Construction is primarily wood and paper. Wooden frames, paper screens, tile roofs, and many larger buildings that still rely heavily on wood. Entire neighborhoods are built wall-to-wall with minimal masonry. That's a cultural, climate, and material reality, and a catastrophic vulnerability. High explosives make craters and damage individual buildings. Incendiaries start fires that spread from house to house faster than firefighters can respond. Tokyo has about 8,000 firefighters and 1,000 pieces of equipment for a population of 7 million. They have roughly 3 extension ladders for the whole metro area. Air raid shelters are almost non-existent, because officials feared building them would damage morale by admitting the city could be bombed. In short, Tokyo is a tinderbox, and American planners know it. Pathfinder aircraft reach Tokyo just after midnight. Elite crews in the best aircraft go in first and drop incendiaries in a large X pattern over the Shitamachi district, a densely populated, working-class area identified by intelligence as housing the highest concentration of dispersed war production. Small machine shops, electronics assemblers, component makers. The exact targets high-altitude raids couldn't hit because they look like ordinary houses from 6 miles up. The Pathfinder fires create a visible aiming point, a burning X in the heart of Tokyo that can be seen from 30 miles away. Over the next 2 hours, 300 more bombers follow, flying through conditions no American crew has ever faced. At 7,500 feet, bombardiers finally gain clear visual contact with their targets. The Norden bomb site, originally designed for visual bombing from 12,000 to 18,000 feet, works exactly as intended. Crews can see individual streets, buildings, and landmarks. They track their targets, make small corrections, and release their bombs with confidence that they'll hit exactly where they aim. The accuracy is incredible. The first wave of bombers lands 70% of their ordnance within 500 feet of their aiming points, almost 10 times more precise than high-altitude bombing at its best. But that precision brings a new level of horror few had ever witnessed. The fires don't just destroy individual buildings. Within 30 minutes, separate blazes merge into one massive inferno that creates its own weather system. Superheated air rises with such force that it generates a firestorm, a phenomenon where the flames sustain themselves by sucking in oxygen from surrounding areas at hurricane speeds. Ground temperatures reach 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt melts and burns. Metal poles bend and collapse. Windows explode from heat even in buildings not directly hit. Those trapped in the firestorm don't simply burn. The heat is so extreme that many are instantly cremated. Others suffocate as oxygen is consumed, creating a vacuum that sucks air from shelters and basements. Crews flying above the target report violent turbulence, their massive aircraft tossed around like toys. The heat from below rises up to 10,000 feet, and pilots can feel warmth through their cockpit glass. Some B-29s are lifted by the updrafts, gaining 1,000 feet of altitude without any control input. The smell of burning wood and flesh fills the planes. Crews wear oxygen masks not for altitude, but because the smoke and stench make it hard to breathe, even miles above. Bombardier Major David later recalled, "When the bomb bay doors opened, smoke rushed in and we smelled this horrible odor. After dropping, we closed the doors and headed for the sea. But the smell was still so strong. The pilot ordered me to open the doors again to let in fresh air. You could only imagine what was happening down there. That odor was human beings burning. The smell clings to flight suits and aircraft interiors for days despite cleaning attempts. 16 square miles of Tokyo burned that night. When reconnaissance planes photographed the city the next morning, the images show total annihilation. Everything within the target zone is gone, not damaged, gone. Only foundations remain, streets cut through fields of ash. Everything else has been vaporized. Post-war analysis estimates roughly 100,000 people died that night, most from suffocation or burns. Some were trapped underground as the oxygen vanished. Others were swept away by firestorm winds strong enough to knock people off their feet. Families were torn apart. Parents lost children. Over 1 million survivors were left homeless. Everything they owned gone within hours. Measured strictly by military metrics, 40% of the district's dispersed war production capacity was wiped out, completely. Workshops burned, tools melted, materials destroyed, and skilled workers killed or displaced. Japan's network of small manufacturers, which supplied critical parts for aircraft, vehicles, and weapons, simply ceased to exist. Factories could be rebuilt, But tools and expertise could not be replaced overnight. That production capacity was gone for good. American losses, though tragic, were light by bomber command standards. 14 B-29s were shot down over Tokyo, mostly by anti-aircraft fire, a few by night fighters. 96 airmen were killed, missing, or captured. That's a 4% loss rate, not the 70% predicted, and nowhere near the catastrophic toll once feared. The intelligence had been right. Japan lacked effective defenses against low-altitude bombers at night. The success of Operation Meetinghouse led to immediate changes in U.S. tactics. 2 days later, on March 11th, 300 B-29s hit Nagoya using the same method, low altitude, nighttime incendiaries, maximum loads, with similar results. Osaka burned on March 13th. Kobe followed on March 16th and 17th. LeMay rotated target cities methodically, allowing one to burn out before striking again, giving his crews brief rest between missions. The pattern never changed. Low-altitude night incendiary raids produced devastating accuracy, 50 to 70%, and destroyed Japan's industrial base city by city. By January 1945, Japan's factories were still producing enough aircraft to replace some losses. But by April, production dropped by 60%. By June, it was down 75%. This wasn't temporary disruption. It was the systemic collapse of Japan's entire industrial network. The problem wasn't just the destruction of big factories, but the loss of the smaller workshops that supplied them. You can't build aircraft engines when the machine shops making precision bearings are gone. You can't make radios without the tiny electronics shops. You can't assemble anything when the people producing screws, rivets, and connectors no longer exist. Each aircraft or tank required thousands of specialized components, and those suppliers were being erased city by city. The human cost was staggering, and morally complex in ways that defy simple judgment. Between March and August 1945, American low-altitude incendiary raids killed roughly 300,000 Japanese civilians. The death toll may have been even higher. Accurate counts are impossible when whole neighborhoods were cremated. Another 5 million people were made homeless. 67 cities were targeted. 40% of Japan's urban area was destroyed by fire. This was not precision strikes on military installations in any meaningful sense. It was the systematic destruction of Japan's industrial cities, fully aware that industry and civilians shared the same streets and buildings. Japanese manufacturers had deliberately scattered production into residential neighborhoods, hoping that blending into ordinary homes and shops would protect them. That tactic had a grim consequence. To destroy war production, you had to burn neighborhoods. LeMay wrestled privately with the moral cost, but never publicly questioned the necessity. After the war, he would state his position bluntly and coldly pragmatic. Every day the conflict continued, more Allied servicemen died across the Pacific. POWs suffered and died in Japanese camps. Asian civilians under occupation continued to be killed and starved. If burning Japanese cities shortened the war even by a single day, he argued, the balance of lives saved versus lives lost favored bombing. That was total war taken to its conclusion, and he never pretended otherwise. General Arnold sent LeMay a congratulatory note as soon as reports arrived from Operation Meetinghouse. This mission shows your crews have the guts for anything. The message, formal in tone, revealed Arnold's relief. Months of failed B-29 operations had been weighing on him. Now there was proof strategic bombing could produce measurable strategic results, and the Air Force's case for independence stabilized. Pressure from Washington eased. Arnold's worst health crisis was behind him. LeMay's position was secure. Tactically, the innovation spread fast and evolved with experience. By May 1945, B-29 crews were running both low-altitude incendiary raids against urban industrial districts and medium-altitude precision strikes with high explosives on specific facilities. Planners chose tactics by target type, weather, and local defenses. Bridges and marshalling yards were attacked from 12,000–15,000 feet with high explosives, where the Norden bomb site kept reasonable accuracy and crews retained some protection. Urban industrial zones were hit with incendiaries from 5,000 to 7,000 feet. The lesson was clear. Altitude was a tactical tool, not a doctrinal constant. Different targets demanded different approaches. The accuracy gains reshaped operations and logistics. A target that previously required 4 separate high-altitude raids could now be neutralized with a single, well-executed low-altitude strike. That meant fewer total sorties and, paradoxically, lower cumulative risk despite a higher chance per mission. The same bomber force could hit more targets in a shorter time. Ordnance produced measurable effects instead of randomly cratering fields. Crew morale improved, grimly because men finally saw tangible results. After months of missions that seemed to accomplish nothing, air crews could watch fires start and cities burn. That psychological impact mattered more than planners had predicted. Crews would accept great danger if they believed their missions mattered. They lost motivation fast when missions felt futile. By July 1945, the targeting problem had become almost absurd. LeMay's staff struggled to find cities large enough to justify continued operations. Post-war analysis would later conclude that, at the rate of attacks in March through June, continued low-altitude incendiary bombing for another 2 or 3 months would likely have forced Japanese surrender without an invasion or atomic bombs. Japan's capacity to sustain modern military operations was collapsing. Food distribution was breaking down. Civilian populations could no longer support the war effort. The military could order resistance, but without industry, transport, and functioning cities, resistance would be meaningless theater. But the war didn't run those extra months. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. A second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days later. Both missions used high-altitude delivery because the weapons required precise detonation and shockwave propagation. Still, the crews used navigation and targeting methods refined during months of low-altitude operations. Approaches that included lower-altitude runs before climbing to release height for the final run. Japan announced surrender on August 15, 1945. The strategic bombing campaign, and especially the low-altitude, incendiary phase from March through August, received significant credit for destroying Japan's ability to keep fighting. Post-war surveys by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that even if an invasion had gone forward, Japan's factories could not have equipped defenders with sufficient weapons, ammunition, or supplies. The industrial base was effectively gone. Pockets of manufacturing remained, but the integrated networks needed for modern war no longer functioned. The lessons from the Pacific campaigns quickly reshaped how analysts looked at air operations in Europe. By late 1944 and into early 1945, 8th Air Force missions over Germany began shifting down from pre-war altitude norms. Not as radical as LeMay's changes in the Pacific, but meaningful. Where bombers had routinely flown at 25 to 27,000 feet, crews started operating at 18,000 feet whenever weather and defenses allowed. The accuracy gains from that modest reduction were immediate and measurable. Operational reports show that by March 1945, bombers were placing about 60% of their ordnance within 1,000 feet of their aim points, versus roughly 15% in early 1943. Improvements came from several sources: better crew training, upgraded bomb sites, and tactical innovations. But lowering altitude was a major factor. Less fall time, clearer visual identification of targets, and easier tracking through Norden sites all helped. The pattern appeared across theaters. Lower altitude usually improved accuracy at the cost of greater vulnerability. The right tactical choice depended on honestly weighing that trade-off instead of sticking to a doctrinal rule that one altitude fit every mission. Sometimes high altitude was the right call, when heavy flak or capable fighter opposition made survival the priority. Other times, low altitude was necessary, when precision mattered and defenses were weak. After the war, the newly independent U.S. Air Force rewrote strategic bombing doctrine to reflect that reality. Field manuals made altitude selection mission-specific. Decide altitude based on target type, enemy defenses, weapon characteristics, and strategic aims. High altitude buys protection. Low altitude buys accuracy and visual acquisition. Medium altitude is a compromise. It sounds obvious now, but it took 3 years of war, billions of dollars, and countless lives to overturn the pre-war assumption that higher was always better. Technology and doctrine evolved together. Post-war reviews of the Norden bomb site showed what crews had suspected. The device was optimized for visual bombing between about 10,000 and 20,000 feet. Its mechanical, computer, and optics performed best in that band. Pushing it to 30,000 feet pushed the equipment past its design envelope. The problem wasn't that the Norden was inherently bad. It was being used outside its parameters. The larger lesson applies to nearly every weapon system. Equipment works best when employed within its design limits. Performance degrades when it's pushed beyond them. Curtis LeMay emerged as the public face of strategic bombing for the next 2 decades. After the war, he took command of Strategic Air Command and turned it from an odd collection of obsolete planes into the most powerful air arm the world had seen. His leadership stayed ruthlessly pragmatic. Use tools for their intended purposes. Don't let doctrine trump observed results, and change immediately when something isn't working. That made him controversial but also devastatingly effective. The B-29's legend changed too. It wasn't the invincible high-altitude fortress its designers envisioned. It was an adaptable platform that could be flown at whatever altitude a mission demanded. That flexibility, rather than a single spec on a datasheet, was its real value. The same airframe that bombed Tokyo from 30,000 feet in late 1944 was bombing from 7,000 feet in March 1945. Same airplane. Radically different employment, radically different outcomes. Flexibility beat rigid specialization. Those altitude lessons carried into modern air warfare in ways 1945 planners couldn't have imagined. Precision-guided munitions changed engagement geometry. A laser-guided bomb released from 40,000 feet can hit within 15 feet of a target. GPS-guided weapons maintain accuracy regardless of release height or most atmospheric quirks. Stealth technology lets aircraft penetrate defended airspace at altitudes that would have been suicidal in World War II, but the core principle stays the same. Altitude is a tactical variable, not a doctrinal constant. Commanders choose altitude based on threats, weapons, aircraft, and target needs, just as LeMay did in 1945. Even with stealth, planners often pick medium altitudes because certain weapons or sensors work best there. The B-2 Spirit can operate at high altitude without easy radar detection, yet missions frequently use medium profiles to optimize weapon delivery and fuel efficiency. During the 1991 Gulf War, stealth fighters capable of higher flight profiles often operated around 15,000–20,000 feet, because that range balanced weapon performance, target acquisition, and endurance. The choice was deliberate. Maximize mission effectiveness rather than maximize safety or obey a doctrine. Cruise missiles represent the logical extension of low-altitude principles. They hug terrain to avoid detection, then use precise guidance to strike targets regardless of release altitude. The through line from 1945 to the present is simple. Altitude is one of many tools in the planner's toolbox. Use it wisely, guided by mission analysis, not by faith in a single sacred principle. Modern cruise missiles fly between 100 and 500 feet, using terrain-following systems to stay hidden below radar coverage. They give up altitude protection completely, relying instead on stealth and surprise. Their accuracy doesn't come from altitude but from GPS and terminal guidance systems. Flying low is what makes their entire mission possible. If they flew higher, they'd be easy targets, losing their biggest advantage. The lesson General Curtis LeMay discovered in early 1945 has been learned over and over again in later wars, though rarely in such dramatic fashion. During the Vietnam War, high-altitude bombing over North Vietnam proved largely ineffective. When the Air Force switched to low-altitude missions, accuracy improved significantly, but so did the losses. The trade-off was always there. In 1972, during the linebacker operations, new electronic jamming and missile suppression finally made high-altitude strikes effective again. Technology had changed, but the fundamental question of altitude never disappeared. In the 1991 Gulf War, coalition pilots flew at different altitudes depending on the mission and the threat. Against Iraq's dense air defenses, high altitude combined with precision-guided weapons worked best. But for close air support, where pilots needed to see the target, they dropped lower. And for isolated, poorly defended targets, they went low to maximize accuracy. Altitude was chosen to fit the mission, not just for safety. The same principles from 1945 still applied, only now with 46 years of new technology behind them. What made the World War II experience so extraordinary was how quickly adaptation happened under pressure. LeMay had just 2 months to rescue the entire strategic bombing campaign from failure. He didn't wait for new technology or more resources. He analyzed the data, saw what wasn't working, and changed tactics immediately. The decision was bold, even reckless. Many senior officers predicted disaster. It went against years of doctrine and training, but the results were immediate and stunning. The human cost, though, remains almost impossible to grasp. Around 300,000 Japanese civilians died in the firebombing raids that targeted entire cities. more than those killed at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. War production and homes were intertwined, and destroying one meant destroying both. These numbers weren't just statistics. They were people who burned alive, suffocated in shelters, or lost everything. LeMay never apologized, though he did acknowledge the moral complexity of what he'd done. His argument was simple but haunting. Ending the war quickly saved more lives in total, even if it cost countless civilian lives in the process. It's logic that's both defensible and horrifying, a glimpse into the moral void created by total war. There were no clean answers, only the brutal truth of what happened. The B-29 crews who flew those low-altitude missions never received the same recognition as the high-altitude bomber crews over Europe. There were no Hollywood movies glorifying their work, no heroic narratives in popular history books. Burning cities didn't fit well into stories of triumph. But those crews, flying stripped-down bombers through smoke and fire, exposed to enemy guns, accomplished what years of high-altitude bombing could not. They hit their targets, destroyed critical infrastructure, and helped end the war. The final irony cuts deep. The solution had always been available. The B-29s could fly low. The Norden bomb site actually worked best at those altitudes. The crews had the skills. The only thing standing in the way was the rigid belief that high altitude was always superior. Once LeMay challenged that assumption and tested low-altitude bombing in combat, everything changed overnight. Today, military academies still teach the B-29 campaign as a lesson in tactical flexibility and the dangers of rigid doctrine. The same aircraft, used in two different ways, produced results so different they could have come from separate wars. That's the point. Weapons are just tools. They have to be used correctly for the job at hand. Altitude isn't a fixed rule. It's a variable to be adjusted for the mission rather than dictated by tradition. Curtis LeMay died in 1990 at the age of 83, leaving behind a legacy that remains both influential and deeply controversial. After World War II, he went on to command the Strategic Air Command, transforming it from a small post-war organization into the backbone of America's nuclear deterrent. Later, he served as Air Force Chief of Staff, and even ran unsuccessfully for Vice President in 1968. Through it all, LeMay never apologized for his wartime decisions. He believed that what he did was necessary to end the conflict, and he stood by that conviction until his death. Today, his principles still shape modern air power doctrine. Match tactics to the mission. Adapt quickly when results fall short. Let strategy guide doctrine, not the other way around. Altitude, in his view, was never to be assumed. It was to be chosen deliberately, based on what the mission required. The next time you hear about precision strikes or strategic bombing in the news, remember this. True precision doesn't come just from advanced technology or smart bombs. It often comes from making the right tactical choices, including the right altitude. Sometimes accuracy means flying lower, getting closer, and accepting the risks that come with that. Hiding at high altitude might feel safer, but it can lead to wasted bombs and meaningless destruction. That's the lesson American bomber crews learned the hard way over Japan in 1945. A lesson paid for with countless lives, both American and Japanese. And it's a lesson that still matters today, just as much as it did 8 decades ago when Curtis LeMay faced failure head-on and had the courage to change.